Hi folks, Greg Marchand here. Welcome to another episode of the Virtual Instructor-Led Training Program brought to you by the Service Sales Academy. In this episode, we're going to talk about your parts matrix. Now that's something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough in my opinion. You see, I believe it's very, very, very important to keep your parts matrix up to date because your parts matrix affects gross profit. Your parts matrix sets how much you're going to mark the parts you sell up, as in how much profit you're going to make from that compared to cost. Too many shops just don't pay any attention to the parts matrix, or if they do, they'll go to a class or they'll read an article and they'll go, hey, you know what, I better take 10 minutes and go check this out. They go into the service management system, they check it out, they maybe make some changes to what it is, or in one case I saw they actually set it up. It had never been set up before. And then they just kind of set it and forget it. They walk away and it kind of gets lost in the day-to-day chaos that is an automotive repair shop. And yet it is a very, very important aspect to how much revenue you bring in and how much gross profit you bring in. Yes, it's not responsible for a huge chunk of the money your organization makes, but every little piece counts. You should be reviewing it every quarter, if you ask me. Now, some people that do what I do for a living will tell you, you should be in there all the time. You should be in there weekly, you should be in there monthly. Look, I'm not going to say you got to be in there all the time, but I do think that if I tell you to check it quarterly and you check it twice a year, that's a huge improvement based on what I've seen around the industry. Every single part you sell affects how much money you're going to make, and it doesn't matter if it's a $1,400 transmission that you only make 25% on, or a bolt that you make 300% on. Every part affects how much money you make overall. So it makes the parts matrix really, really important. An appropriate markup can make a year-end difference on these parts. A lot of shops, they don't realize how much they're losing, and that can be in 100 different areas. And the parts matrix is one of those areas. I watched it have a significant effect on gross profit of auto repair shops. Now, what should it be? Oh, we could have multiple discussions about that for hours on end. Essentially, the higher the better. Your gross profit on parts, generally what I see in the industry is right around 45%. If we're lucky, it's pushing 50%. Look, I know people that I respect that say your gross profit should be 60%. Well, boy, I haven't seen 60% in a very, very long time. The thing is, the gross profit is going to be affected by many, many, many things within your organization, what your core products are that you sell, what your market can bear. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But essentially, your gross profit, really, the higher it is, the better. If you're not at 40%, you really need to pay attention. If you're at 45%, then I'm gonna say, look, bump it up a little bit. Shoot for 47%, shoot for 49%. Let's see how high we can get it by paying attention. I'm a big believer, I should say, on people setting goals. And I really believe that no matter what your parts gross profit is right now, whether it's 40%, 50%, 60%, no matter where you want to be, you're only going to get there by paying attention. And you really have to identify where you're at right now. If you have no idea what your average gross profit on a monthly basis is, then you're not paying attention. You need to understand what it is right now and then bump it up by 2%, like I said a second ago. Just these little increments will make you money at the end of the year. Go watch the video on growing gross profit for your shop and growing gross profit by repair order, because your parts matrix connects to your gross profit per repair order. If you're paying attention to each and every invoice, then and you bump your goal by 2%, then your year end is going to be a lot better than it was last year end. So identify where you're at right now, set yourself a target, and look, if you want to shoot for more than 2%, that's fine. I like smaller increments. Why do I like smaller increments? I like smaller increments because the individuals, the men and women that work for us, they see it as attainable. And if they see it as attainable, it is attainable. And once they attain the 2%, we can bump it another 2%. The other reason I like these small incremental growths is customers don't really notice it, right? You know, I had a conversation about shop labor rate recently, and I said, you know, if you're a shop that hasn't paid attention to your labor rate in 2 years, now all of a sudden you're $15 an hour behind, you can't just jump to $15 an hour. Well, same thing is true of my parts gross. If I say, oh, you know what, I've never really had a parts matrix, and you know, Greg says I'm losing out on a lot of money, I'm gonna bump everything 10%. Well, it's way more noticeable to everybody at that point. It may not feel as attainable to your service counter staff. So pay attention to each invoice, go for 2% increments, and understand where you're starting right now, and tell everybody where you want to be, all right? Set the goals. Now, what is a matrix, and how do we work with this matrix? Essentially, the parts matrix is a table of markup for categories of parts. Now, when I say categories, what I mean is price ranges of parts. So, you know, $0 to $1, $1.01 to $5, $5.01 up to $50. Those are the categories we talk about. Can you have separate part categories, as in undercar, you know, ball joints or batteries or exhaust, things like that, and have a specific matrix for those? Yes, you can. And if you're ready to go there, then go there. Because if you're in say the accessories business and you sell a lot of Jeep accessories, then you may want to have a separate parts matrix just for those accessories, and pay attention to the markup within those accessories. Markup should never ever be applied equally across all the parts categories. And this is something that many shops do. They'll mark it up all 10% or all 20% or all 50%, whatever it might be. Well, of course, you can't get away with 50% markup if it's a $6,000 engine, right? So we don't, and you mark a bolt up, $1 bolt, 50%, well, you're not making a ton of money on it. So we really want to have categories of markup so that the lower priced parts have a much higher markup. Now, none of this is carved in stone, okay? Ever. What I want you to do is I want you to go pull up that parts matrix. Go take a look at your parts matrix. And let's see where the parts are priced right now. And then I want you to bump it up a little bit. Bump it up, 1%, 2%, 5%. But I want you to see where your categories are right now, what kind of markup you're charging right now. Once we bump it up, and once we get it, and I'll show you on the next slide what I would recommend as a starting point, don't be afraid to adjust the matrix on a regular basis. There are going to be some things that are going to stand out when you do this. And you may go, oh, you know what, I'm not competitive there anymore. I've got to back this off. Okay, that's fine. And you can adjust that single part or that part category. No problem. But don't ever be afraid to mess around with your matrix and try to find that sweet spot. Now, here's a starting point. A friend of mine talked to me about this many years ago, and this is where I got the numbers from. I'm not saying that these are the industry average, but you'll make some money if you set your parts matrix like this. You'll see if you Google parts matrix and what should the parts matrix be, you'll find articles on it. You'll find everybody's opinion on it, and the parts matrix has no magic to it. To me, in all honesty, the parts matrix is what can we get away with. And when I say what can we get away with, I'm not talking about hiding anything from anybody. I'm talking about what's our market going to accept? What is our competition currently doing? And are we going to be too much of an outlier if I go too crazy with my markups? And so there's no definite here's what you need to do for a parts matrix, but there are some really good starting points. And you can zoom in on this and take a look at that. The part cost, if it's $0 to $1, then I recommend a 70% gross profit. And that's going to give you roughly a 240% markup. So your margin is going to be 240%. And then from $1 to $5, we're going to drop gross profit back a little bit to 65%. From $5 to $50, 60% gross profit. And you can see that we're making as much money as we can on the lower priced parts, but in those mid-range parts that we're selling a pretty good majority of, that really should be where our volume is, between the $50 and $100 and the $100 and $500 parts. That's where a lot of our volume is. And so we want to be making 50% or greater on most of those parts. Now, if you can get more than that, and you think you can, then go ahead and try it. Mark it up 125% if it's $400. You have total control over your parts matrix. This is a guideline. Start here and then look for those outliers and make sure that intuitively it still feels okay to you. Don't get too freaked out if things go up $5 or $10 or the larger parts go up by $50 or $40. That's okay. That happens. That happens quite often when you go in and you change your parts matrix right away. And the other thing that I notice when you change your parts matrix and you set it to something like this is that if you've had service advisors in the past that would pay attention to these things, then they may notice a difference and they may say something. Some of them, unfortunately, are tempted to make the adjustments themselves on the repair order. That makes the conversation you have with them really, really important. They need to understand what your goal is with your profit margin on parts, why you've made the changes in the parts matrix that you have, and what their targets are for gross profit per repair order, both parts and labor, so that they get the dispatch thing right and they get the parts thing right, so that we're making as much money as we can possibly make in fairness to the customers. Keep in mind what your market can bear, what your competitive niche is, and where your competition is at. I don't ever want you to sell on price though, right? So when I say where your competition is at, I'm not saying you've got to set your parts prices where your competition is. If you're a shop that prides themselves on quality, you've got a great customer base, your customers are you do excellent work, you can charge more than anybody else in your area. No problem. Don't ever sell on price, but still be aware of what your competition is doing. You don't have to know every price that they're charging. You can just kind of audit it. You can mystery shop them if you want. And just, for 5 or 6 items, have a relative, have your wife, have your husband, have a great uncle. Call the other shop and get a price on certain things. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples, of course, but don't ever try to sell on price, because look, today's day and age, let's sell on value. Let's sell on overall value. The fact that you have a warranty, the fact that you do great work, you've got master diagnostic technicians in the shop, etc. Also, never ever be afraid of modifying your matrix to try to find that sweet spot. And when I say sweet spot, what I mean is that place where some customers are complaining about the price, but not a lot. What's the old adage? You're not charging enough if nobody's complaining, right? So if some people start to complain, okay, you might be right there. Have regular meetings with your service counter staff to see if, do they feel like we're losing business? Are people saying no thank you? Or are they hearing anecdotally, you know what, so-and-so can do it for this much, I'm going to go there. And if you are, then maybe we got to back off certain categories of parts. But don't be afraid of making some minor adjustments to your parts matrix to find that sweet spot. And never be afraid of experimenting, right? I've watched shops go, oh boy, I don't know if I can do this, and I talked them into doing it. Nobody ever said a word. And 2 months later, when the numbers are looking really good, they say, well shoot, look what I'm doing here. Nobody said a word to me. I wonder if I should have gone more. Well, boy, wasn't that a different conversation than we had 2 months previous. So get in there, experiment with it a little bit. Use the numbers in this presentation we showed you on that table to find a starting point. And if you want to bump those numbers, bump those numbers. All right, don't be afraid of going too high and then backing off. No problem. You'll recover from it. But once you do it, pay attention. Right, and that's really what we're talking about here. Is pay attention. Make sure to observe what happens. Are you getting closer to your target average per RO? Did it get you closer to your gross profit parts target, your parts gross profit target? Are some prices crazy outrageous? Did some just do something crazy and oops, we screwed up, we better make this adjustment? And you don't have to make it to the entire category, the entire price category. You can make it sometimes to the individual part, or move the part into a different category if you're using actual part categories rather than price categories, right? But pay attention to what happens after you make changes to the matrix. Watch it daily, watch it weekly, watch it monthly. pay attention, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to start to figure out where your gross profit is coming from. I did a program a while ago on understanding your core products. And what I got to in that program was, if we watch where we make our money, as in what parts are selling, what parts are making us the most gross profit, then we want to start marketing towards that. We want to start selling more of that, because let's face it, yes, we fix automobiles, but we're in business, and businesses have to make money. Money comes from the profit that we make. So if we pay attention to the profit and where it comes from, we'll make more of it. Dealer parts are they're a challenge, because look, as a technician, and I just had this conversation last week with a technician, he was upset because the service advisor wasn't getting parts from the dealer, because he just didn't want these aftermarket parts, and his case was an O2 sensor. And I explained to him, look, you know what, blame me for it, because I lean on your service advisor to grow gross profit, and he and or she know that they're not going to make gross profit on a dealer part, and so they're going to go get the best quality part they feel they can get and make the most gross profit on it. There are parts that you are going to have to get from a dealership. There's just no choice. But don't necessarily go by list price. List price is one of these goofy things today that really, list price is nothing but a made up price. It's made up for reference. And when a dealer tells you this is list price, it may or may not be list price. All right, it's oftentimes a marked up price they're going to sell you a part for, or they're going to give you this list price for reference and say, hey, look at the discount we're giving you. Well, yeah, because they made up the list price. List prices aren't really list prices anymore. And yeah, it's hard to make money on dealer parts. I get that. Generally, if we can do somewhere between 25 and 30% markup on a dealer part, if you can get to 35, 40% markup, I know a shop that gets 50% markup on dealer parts. They feel like they can still be competitive with that 50% markup. I wonder, but look, if they're using a 50% markup for the stuff they don't really want to do, then I have a hard time arguing with them. But generally, if you're right around that 25 to 30% markup on dealer parts, you'll be okay. You can make up a little bit more on the labor gross if you bump the labor time a little bit and still stay competitive. Dealer labor rates are oftentimes higher than what the independent labor rates are anyway. So, and look, your gross profit is much higher on labor anyway. So I guess I would rather come in a little bit lower than what I'd like to make on the dealer part and bump the labor time up and make a little more gross on the labor time, especially paying attention to things like dispatch and labor time bump that's already built into the system and whatnot. Then mark the dealer part up too much and make the money on the part. Okay, so that's just my opinion on that. But try to get a 25 to 30% markup on most dealer parts. If you need more than that, mark up the labor. In terms of time, just 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths will make up all of the money that you may not be making on the part. Pay attention to your niche in your core business. Now, we've already mentioned this, but I just want to make the point again that margins are really going to vary with your work mix, right? I'll mention in a minute what tires and batteries do to it, and you all are very well aware of that. But the more specific you are in terms of what you sell, if it's, again, we're targeting transmissions, or we're targeting Jeep accessories, or we're targeting exhaust, or we're just we're in the maintenance business rather than the repair business, you're oftentimes going to see lower gross profit margins. And that makes your parts matrix even more important. It makes your labor times even more important, and your ability to pay attention to gross profit even more important. So get into your parts matrix, identify what you're selling, what your grosses are on them, try to bump them up, and make sure that you're making the most amount of money on the majority of parts that you sell. And look, if you are a transmission shop and you can't get more than 40% or 45%, maybe 50% on a transmission, well, you know what? You got to think about how you're going to grow your business to grow your gross profit. And that's a it's a business design thing and it's a planning thing, but you can do it. You can do it, but it starts with understanding what your parts matrix is now and where you would like it to be. you can't control certain things, right? Tires, batteries, accessories, all these really highly competitive parts that everybody's selling that's almost a commodity today. We can't control that. So what we need to pay attention to is, are we selling alignments when we sell tires? What are we selling along with the battery? Yeah, maybe we're selling a battery, but we're selling the battery off the free courtesy inspection that includes a charging system inspection, and we're getting alignments and undercar, suspension work and a lot of other stuff with it. So some organizations are tempted to, when they look at their parts matrix, they'll include tires. I don't include tires. Tires I leave out of the parts matrix. That category I kind of leave out of the parts matrix. I just talk to my service counter about it. Batteries are kind of the same way. If you're going to stay competitive with a big change of the world, we can't mark batteries up that much. So oftentimes that's either it's a manual entry or it's a separate part category, and it just is what it is. Accessories we can actually have a separate matrix for in some systems. Other systems we have to manually override whatever our price matrix is. But don't worry so much about these highly competitive parts in terms of your matrix. Make sure that everything else that you're selling has the appropriate markup. Make sure your labor times are good, and you'll be okay. Yes, when you go into your gross profit and you look at gross profit per RO, you will see tires drag it down, batteries drag it down, all kinds of things will drag it down. It's just part of the business, not a ton we can do about it, but stay competitive with everything else you can. And then never ever forget, don't give anything away. This is a shop culture thing, really. There are shops that I walk into that they're giving everything away. They've got a wall full of bolt bins, and they'll give nuts and bolts away. They'll give the shop supplies away. They haven't touched the shop supply rate for years now. They'll give hose clamps away. They'll give valve stems away. All of this stuff costs money, and if you're giving it away and not collecting for it, you're giving money away. You've got to account for everything, and remember, most of the time you're going to make the most money on the lowest price part. So the valve stems and the hardware and all that stuff that we're really tempted to give away, you've got to have a conversation with everybody in the shop and say, look, you know what? We're a business. We're here to make money. The only way we make money is to charge for the things that we sell a customer. If we give a valve stem, if we give 4 valve stems away to a customer and we don't tell the service advisor that we used 4 valve stems, then we lost the money. Yeah, but Greg, it's only $5. Okay, it's $5. $5 today, $5 tomorrow, $5 times 5 or 6 days a week. Next thing you know, we're at $25 a week, we're at $100 a month, and we're at $1,200 a year just for that one thing. And then if we're doing that with 10 things, we're at $12,000. $12,000. When we give one little thing away, we don't realize the impact it has at the end of the year. Make sure you're accounting for everything. Have that conversation with your employees about how it's important to have everything accounted for on the repair order. If you use it, it's got to go on the repair order. Okay? Or, there's other ways around that. But I want everybody thinking about the business. I want everybody thinking about, let's not give anything away. Let's get fair value for everything that we do and everything that we sell. In summary, your parts matrix really should ensure that you increase your gross profit. It will if you pay attention to it, because it all matters. And if your parts matrix has the appropriate markups for appropriate price categories at the very least, if not actual part categories, then it's going to make a huge difference to your gross profit. All of that is great, and it will kind of function on its own, but I still want you to set a target. And if you set your target and you set your matrix pricing and then you pay attention, you'll turn your business into a profit center. All right? I would love it if you would set a calendar date, set a reminder on your phone to review the matrix quarterly and get in there and start paying attention to it. I've watched shop owners and shop managers that never paid attention to gross profit before begin to pay attention to gross profit and start to make the correlations. The parts matrix will help make some correlations between what you're selling and what you're making and where you need to take your business. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to text me, shoot me an email. Until we see you again, keep up the great work and never stop learning.